Welcome to Let's Not Meet. There's more Let's Not Meet stories I'm doing. I've been having a lot of fun with these, and I'm using a new editing program. So tell me what you think of these horrifying Let's Not Meet stories. We got 3 more of them, and as you know, they all contain some sort of weird or disturbing stalker or some sort of feeling of being watched. So if that type of thing will bother you, click off the video now. It's your only escape. For the rest of you, sit back, relax, turn the lights down, and prepare to be scared. This is 3 new horrifying Let's Not Meet stories. Christmas in a Haunting Cabin by Navy 177. So, this happened at Christmas a couple of years ago, when I was spending the holiday with my parents and little brother along with my cousins, aunts, and uncles. We lived in a suburb in Ontario, but we were venturing out into the woods for Christmas, an idea my mom had for quite a while. They always loved the idea of being out in a haunting cabin during Christmas with their families. I'm 22 years old, but at the time, I was nearly 18, and my little brother Tom was about 11. We're really close, and we do about everything together. We also had a dog, a German Shepherd called Tigger, who also came along for the ride as well. He's a real softie, but he can be overprotective, especially of my little brother Tom. Anyway, we left from our house on Christmas Eve at about 2 p.m. We climbed into our dad's truck, filled it with all of our stuff and presents for our extended family, and we were on our way. Tom and I were really excited, winding each other up, and my parents were having a friendly conversation as we moved along the road. We arrived at a village near the cabins that we were staying in, and we caught up my dad's sister Bailey, along with her husband and 3 kids. They don't really converse for long, but Billy was a bit unsure of where to go from the village to get to the cabins. So that's when my dad simply helped her out by writing down a few directions. We soon got back on our way, and we arrived at the cabins about 4 p.m., which, let me tell you, being in a car for that long was a little bit of a number on the back. There were clustered around and spaced out about the woods. Each family had a cabin, and each one where people would be able to meet up with a pool table and a swimming pool of sorts. It was the kind of place we could all chill together and enjoy each other's company. Anyway, the weather was already really cold when we arrived, and snow was falling down around us. So me and my little brother unpacked our things, got into the cabin, and settled in for the night. My dad started a fire, whilst my mom made dinner. It was great. The Christmas decorations were already set up, and we played a few board games as the night got darker. Dad, Tom, and I decided before coming on the trip that we'd go hunting sometime, so we planned on going the next day. I'd been a few times with my dad, but this was Tom's first time. He was only there to watch us though. He was too young to actually shoot anything. It reached about 10 p.m. and my brother and I were getting a bit tired, so we decided to head to bed. My dad kept his rifles in a bag, which he kept under his own bed that I was lovingly sleeping on. He'd usually keep it in a locked box, but I thought that there was no point since we were going to be going hunting the next morning anyway. Tom and I were sharing a room at the end of the cabin, facing the flowing river. The view was just beautiful. Tom and I fell asleep with our dog Tigger lying on the bottom of Tom's bed. Now, this is when things actually start to pick up and get a bit creepy. It was about 3 a.m. when I woke to Tigger growling. I didn't find this particularly unusual because my dad suffers from insomnia. Sometimes he can't sleep and he just sits in our, sitting room at home and just watches TV. Like I said, Tigger is extremely overprotective and growls at any noise he hears, but that's when I noticed that there was no light coming from under my door. My dad never just sits in the dark. I whispered to Tigger, telling him to be quiet as Tom slept, but his growling soon turned to barking, which woke Tom up. He asked me, excuse me, what's going on? But I said Tigger must have heard some deer outside or something, and just to simply go to bed. Suddenly, our bedroom door swung open, and the light switch turned on. My eyes stung, and I tried to focus on whoever was at the door, and it was my dad. "Hey, were you two just laughing now?" he asked. I turned to look at Tom. His eyes are wide and his face is pale, and I simply responded with, no, why? I replied as he moved over to our curtain, pulling it back, and it looked outside into the pitch-black wilderness. What are you looking at?" Tom asked as our dad closed the curtains again. "Nothing. Just go back to sleep." I was kind of creeped out that my dad didn't say anything about, what he was doing, but he turned the light back off and we tried falling asleep again, and of course, I couldn't. I was wide awake for the rest of the night, flinching pretty much at every noise that would come along. I'm pretty sure we've all done this at some point or another. It was about 4:30 a.m. when I finally jerked it off, but it must have been moments later when I heard a strange crunching noise coming outside our window. I wasn't sure what it was, or if it was an animal. It sounded like footsteps, though. And it had an overwhelming... I had this overwhelming feeling of fear, and I pulled the covers over my face. Sweat began to cover my forehead. I then heard a faint tapping noise on our window. Something like a... which lasted for a good few minutes. I was petrified. I couldn't move. Tigger was awake though at this point. I saw his face turn towards the window, his ears pointed and listening intently. Tapping started to grow again, but it was louder this time. It was causing Tigger to bare his teeth. What happened next is the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me. "I know you're in there, little guy," said a deep husky voice, and he whispered as a horrible shiver went down my spine. "Why don't you open the window, come out here, and play with me?" I was instantly filled with rage, and I thought that it was bound to be one of my cousins playing a stupid prank on me. So I leaned forward, peeked through the gap in the curtain, ready to give him hell for scaring the shit out of us, but standing there wasn't any of our cousins. It was just a creepy older man, maybe in his 60s, possibly 70s, his hair matted down, and his clothes looked dirty and ancient. He was stroking the window with his hands, breathing on it. I could even see the fog from his breath getting on the window as he spoke. I went from under my bed and pulled the curtain back. "Get out of here or I'll shoot," I said. I felt an adrenaline rush through me as the creepy man's eyes widened, the most terrifying smile I saw across his face. Tigger began barking louder than I've ever heard him bark, and my parents obviously heard a commotion and came running to our window, turning the lights on. My mom screamed as he saw this old man through the window, Tigger furiously continuing to bark at the old man, and my dad yelling at him, telling him he's gonna call the fucking police if he didn't get out of our house right now. Tom was petrified, but I was more angry than anything else. How could some sicko do this? There are children in here. I was just extremely glad I had the rifle. The cops caught the guy just a few minutes later and arrested him. I found out a couple days later that that creepy man was a homeless man living in the woods, and he was suffering from a lot of mental issues. It scares me to death to think that this could have happened to me and my brother, and I don't know what would have happened to my brother if I hadn't been there. We spent the remainder of Christmas Day in the cabin. We stayed in our Aunt Billy's cabin overnight. There was no way we were sleeping in our own after what happened. We went home first thing on Boxing Day and never looked back. My dad only told me the other day that he knew someone was hanging around our cabin, so he intentionally left a rifle under my bed just in case if I needed to use it in self-defense. He did that because he didn't want to scare any of us. He called the cops after he heard the guy laughing outside of his bedroom window, singing nursery rhymes. He knew it would take a while for the cops to reach the cabin, so safe to say that it was the scariest experience of my life. It was so weird that some guy in the middle of the woods could just fucking do that. So please, creepy homeless man who sings weird nursery rhymes, fucking let's not meet again. Crazy Brother of Mine by Ezekiaru. I've been lurking around this site for a few weeks or so, enjoying your guys' entries. I've been mulling about the postings, and that's when I remembered this experience of mine, and I've decided to kill some time and write it up today. Unfortunately, the person I would like to never meet again is my own brother. I have a large family, so I guess there's bound to be a few rotten eggs. I was living with my mother at the time and her boyfriend Greg, and I was going to high school. I graduated and moved out during the middle of this incident, so I must have been around 17 to 18 at the time. I'm now 24. My mom lives in the middle of nowhere on some land my family owns, next to a creek and some smaller mountains. There are several trailer homes set up there. One I lived in with my mom and Greg. The various others just belong to my other siblings and they live there. When I was on my last stretch of high school, my eldest brother Mason, who was in his 40s at the time, was having some pretty serious issues with his friends and neighbors, and moved into the property with us by adding his tiny mobile home to my mobile home in the mix. I think it was due to him breaking into one of their houses or something to that effect. Before this, I only ever saw him a handful of times when I was very, very little. And I would go with my dad when he would go over to Mason's place to check in on him. I don't remember much, only that Mason would always ignore me, and that his place was littered with tons of beer cans and cigarette butts, and it literally smelled like a dive bar down there. Anywho, I quickly came to understand why Mason's friends had gotten fed up with him. He'd begun filling in my family about the voices he'd hear. His stories changed a lot. Sometimes these voices were out to kill him, and sometimes they were out to hurt the rest of us. At one point, he was certain that they were from the government and they were fucking spying on him, no joke, because he hacked into something of theirs. Now, imagine Mason's a fucking redneck and no computer genius. He just had a very inflated ego. He seemed to be unable to comprehend that the voices weren't real, and he was pretty much always drunk, and he had a pretty wild, youth where he did drugs and acid, and enough to really fry anyone's brain. Although he would never talk to me directly, he told my mom that I was going to be raped and sick little shit like that. It was pretty stressful to hear that kind of stuff, almost on a daily basis. He'd constantly roam the property with his guns in hand. The rest of the family would be really patient and listen to everything he had to say. He would patrol the area for peace of mind, and they would offer him advice and all that type of stuff, but it never really helped. Throughout all of this, the police had been called several times, and Mason had been in and out of jail and mental hospitals. Half the time, he was the one who called the police to protect him from the voices. Mason would do things like shout at the voices all the time. He was so loud you could hear him shouting from the other side of the property, and worst of all, he'd occasionally fire his gun at random sometimes, outside and sometimes within the trailer. One or two times the police were called because he shot a hole in our wall. One late evening, while my mom and Greg were away on vacation for the weekend, I was alone, watching some TV. Mason bursts into a panic and storms through the house with his gun as always, slamming every door open. I don't remember him saying a word to me. He just leaves, leaving all the doors open. Maybe an hour after that, one of my brothers, Jay, come over for some food. I told him what happened, and Jay then proceeded to tell me that on his way over, he thought that he heard the cock of a gun, but nothing of it until I told him the story. It was late at night and pitch dark by the time, and there was nothing that we could really do. I should also mention that Mason's little trailer was between the one I lived in and the one Jay lived in, by the way. It still scares me to think that Jay could have been killed that night. I don't really think it would have been too big of a long shot to think that Mason could have mistaken Jay for one of these voices in the dark and accidentally shot him. After my mother and Gray got home a few days later, I told them about the incident. I don't know what was said between them, but another brother of mine, John, who was kind of, the man of the house after my dad died, and he was able to get Mason to hand over his guns for safekeeping. That made me feel better for a while, but John gave them back after like a fucking week or so. And that was a bad idea, I should mention. But as I said, the rest of my family went really easy on Mason, and to this day, I don't fucking understand why. I moved out shortly after this, thank Jesus, so all I know is that, well, from what I heard from here on out, apparently my mother got really done at being guilt-ridden about being responsible for her child, and she finally asked him to leave, as all the instantly blatant disrespect was starting to take the toll on her. The last time they saw each other, to my knowledge, was when he got into an argument with my mother and broke her finger when she proceeded to flip him off. My mother was not the most mature person in the world when in an argument, but that's no excuse. Another brother of mine jumped in to protect her and had a few ribs cracked. After that, my mother was able to get a restraining order on him, and pretty much that was the end of it. I'm just grateful it ended without anyone's getting seriously hurt or killed. Last I knew, my brother-in-law took on the responsibility of being Mason's lawyer and tried to convince him to go into rehab and the like, but it never lasts long. Even when he agrees to do it, I don't know where Mason is or what he's doing now, and I fucking don't care. He's my brother, and he just doesn't change. In fact, he's selfish, dangerous, and insane person, and I hope I never see him again after the things he put my family through. So, Mason, let's not meet again. I will never search for an apartment on Craigslist again. By that guy, Chris 96. Me and my girlfriend Kaylee decided to buy an apartment together. When she was looking on Craigslist, she saw a really luxurious penthouse apartment for only $300 a month. It was really nice as we looked over the city, and it had a really nice bedding and big bathtub. It was just everyone's dream apartment. Kaylee calls the man and he said he's happy to show her the apartment. And she said me and my boyfriend are on the way. What's weird is that the man on the phone was like, oh, okay. Didn't know you were having people come with you. Alarms were already starting to go off in my head when he said that. Kaylee says to me that we should, well, just go see what it looks like and just leave. I agreed, and we waited outside the apartment. It was really rusty looking and had tall grass around it. We looked at the ad, and when we looked, and we both looked at each other as we saw a greasy-looking older male come up to us. He had a white tank top on and tan shorts with a really rusty beard and braided hair. Kaylee and I were looking at each other in disgust as he pointed a finger at me and he said, "You stay downstairs, young man." For me being from Canada and being young, I have never ever witnessed something like this in my life. Now, I should say that Kaylee is from Australia, and she's pretty tough, so if this man tried anything, I'm pretty sure she would kick his ass. I waited downstairs, and I heard a faint scream coming from the basement. I didn't think much of it, as I thought it was just some kid outside, but then I heard it again and decided to call the police and told them, well, what was going on. They came after 20 minutes, and Kaylee pulls me outside. She says she's not going to get this place at all. I told her about the screams in the basement, and the man got arrested. And, well, he was wanted in another state. And the screaming from downstairs was actually a woman named Stephanie, who was also interested in the apartment, which, in reality, Kaylee said it was a shit house with dirty clothes and women's clothing just strewn about and all that. I know never to go search for stuff like that on Craigslist ever again. Me and Kaylee now live in a really nice rent-owned home in Orange County. And all I have to say is this: don't always believe what you see in Craigslist ads. You'll never know what kind of mastermind sick fucking lies behind them. I'll be doing a proper creepypasta on Wednesday. I just wanted to leave you guys with something after that last depressing video I did about Mr. Nightmare. Thanks for listening, and thanks for the support. I already get the feeling people are gonna hate me after this, so I'm already getting ready to get depressed.